Good morning and welcome to Bible study time. It's Sunday morning, September 3rd. Man, what happened February? I don't know. Do you? It's just been uh, marking off one day at a time and they seem to go by way too fast. Well, we're already starting a new unit. It's a new quarter. And the title of our new unit is Staying True in a World Far from God. That kind of has some interesting connotations to it. Our world is far from God, but our God is not far from the world. And it's just a reminder of the exile when um, the Hebrews, the Israelites, they sinned against God, and God warned them and said, "You're going to be in big trouble if you don't do what I told you to do and commands you to do." And the next thing you know, they're out, and the Jerusalem's destroyed. The nation is desolate pretty much, except for a few remnant people that stayed. And of course, the northern kingdom has already fallen long before, and the Babylonians came. Good old King Nebuchadnezzar, he came and he sacked several nations on his way, and came as far as Israel. Um, did to Jerusalem and basically took the king, took him out, and took them all, took a lot of the people out of there, took them back to um, Babylon, where he tried to train them to be Babylonians. And that was probably kind of a smart move on his part. They probably did that a lot in that day. I don't really recall hearing, or nor do I. Did I go back and research that? But they did that kind of thing. So when um, we know them as Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they got there and they were selected and chosen, did he take lots of young men? Well, yes. Did he take others from other nations that might have been that kind of royalty people? Yes. And so when they got there, then they were selected out of that bunch, out of those young men that they took. If you can take the best young men, then you can do a lot to destroy or to take away the chances of a good army in the future. And so they did that. They took them out, and then they got them, and so they hand selected them then to put them in the training program. It's kind of like a 3-year university, so to speak, and put them in a training program. Anyway, so the book of Daniel tells us about that experience for Daniel, as well as his visions, his prophecies, other things that he saw. But we get his lifespan of dealing with the Babylonian kings. So we begin then. As I said, the title of the unit is Staying True in a World Far from God. And our world, as their world, they were far from God in a foreign land, and God was really in Jerusalem in their minds. And they learned a lot about how God is not just in Jerusalem. He's not just, kind of hanging out on the outskirts of Egypt. He's not just going to speak to Abram and Ur of the Chaldees, which is in the Babylonian realm over there. No, he is God. He is everywhere. And so they're going to learn that. And even when they're in exile, God knows where they are, and he will worship them. And in honoring him, he will be glorified. So we begin then with the first unit or lesson, and that is, if you're going to stay true in a world that's far away from God, then you need to develop strong convictions. And we begin reading in Daniel chapter 1. Great place to start. We'll skip the first couple of verses. You can go back and read those because it just kind of gives, overview, summary of what's kind of going on. And then we'll jump right in at verse 3 and following. Okay? And the point of this lesson is this: our convictions, not our circumstances, should define who we are. And that is true, totally true. Don't let your circumstance define you. Don't let your emotions take hold. Your convictions, what you truly believe, about life should be what is the understanding, the overarching picture that you want to portray about yourself. So here we begin. Daniel 1, verse 3. The king ordered Ashpenaz or Ashpenaz or however you're, I had Greek, which is a New Testament language. I had Greek with a Cajun, so I learned Cajun Greek. I had Hebrew with I don't really know what Dr. Matheny was at Midwestern, but anyway. And I learned some Hebrew from Gary Gagliotti, who was an Italian. So, I've kind of been tainted all the way around with my languages, but there are sometimes multiple pronunciations, but ordinarily the meaning of the word comes through, or the meaning of the name comes through in the right way. So Ashpenaz was the king, Nebuchadnezzar's chief eunuch. And that word eunuch, we use that to think of someone who's been neutered, castrated, that works within the women. But sometimes that word can be used as he's just, like a chief servant. He's just like someone who is dedicated, committed totally to the king. So he's trustworthy, completely trustworthy. We don't know how it was used here. We just, kind of have to keep that in mind because he was working with a bunch of young men. Well, we don't know about that either. Anyway, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from the nobility. Verse 4, young men without any physical defect, good-looking, suitable for instruction in all wisdom, knowledgeable, perceptive, and capable of serving in the king's palace. He was to teach them the Chaldean language and literature. The Chaldean language and literature was kind of a culture thing. We know Abram came from Ur of the Chaldees, and they were kind of a developed people. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you've heard this or not, but when excavation was done in the ancient city of Babylon, it had one of the biggest, if not the biggest, libraries in all the known world and at that time. And so they were very learned. The Chaldean concept, the culture, the mindset was probably even in its day, maybe more precise than like the Hellenistic culture or the Roman culture. So anyway, it says in verse 5, the king assigned them daily provisions from the royal food and from the wine that he drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to attend the king. So these guys were trained to be the king's servants, to do whatever the king would bid. And so they needed to be trained in a good way, in the ways of the Babylonians and in Chaldean culture. The chief eunuch gave them names. He gave them names Belteshazzar to Daniel, Shadrach to Hananiah, Meshach to Mishael, and Abednego to Azariah. We don't always know them as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah as the three Hebrew children in the fire, but that's who they were. They're the same guys. And what do those names mean? Well, we'll look at that in a minute. But these were picked because they were top of the line. They were cream of the crop guys, and they looked the part. They were not only good looking, but they were physical, and don't know what kind of aptitudes they did with them, but they, figured out they were the best of the best. They'd taken out all these from Israel, these young men. They'd also taken out young men from other nations along the way that they had destroyed or had conquered. And so here they were in Babylon, and they were rounding up, these guys, and they were going to pick out the best ones, and they were going to be trained to be the king's servants. So we immediately see here they were, and they were Hebrew guys. They were Israelites, and immediately we're going to see a conflict. What's the conflict? Well, they were to learn all this stuff. It's interesting to me that they were not against the learning. I don't know of Middle Eastern people who are against learning? How many doctors do we have in our country who are Middle Easterners or some type of Easterner? How many people do we have like that really do rise? It seems like almost every year, some Middle Eastern person wins the spelling bee, the children's spelling bee. So they're not against learning. And so these guys weren't afraid that they were going to be taught something that would cause them to forget their background, that would forget who they were in God, in Yahweh, that they'd been taught from the time they were children. They weren't thinking that. But when it came to the diet, they were thinking, we're not going to put something in our body. We can put whatever in our minds because we're confident our minds are going to survive. But whatever we put in our body, we don't want to disgrace our God. And we know our God will bless us. And so that's where Daniel was in this process with these guys. Okay, so then we move on to the next passage. Is there anything else I want to say on that? I'm just thinking out loud here. You know how we are. You know how I am. I can always, I was going to talk to you about their names, wasn't I? That's what I was going to say. Daniel means God is my judge, but he was given the name Belteshazzar, which means Bel, or, we would say Baal, a false god, their god that they worshiped. He will protect him. Hananiah means God has been gracious. And he is given the name Shadrach, which means the command of Aku. Aku was another one of their gods. He wasn't as great as Baal or Belteshazzar, but, that Daniel's name represented, but Aku was another god. Mishael in the Hebrew means who is what God is. That's a great name, isn't it? We get our word, our name, Michelle or Michael or something like that. Who is what God is? And it's a question, but it's also, you're kind of the person, if you have that name, you should reflect who God is. And he became Meshach, which means who is what Aku is. So he again is just switching them to a different God, basically. And then Azariah, the Lord has helped, became Abednego, which means the servant of Nebo. Nebo was another god of theirs. So he gave them religious names. They weren't afraid to take on different names. I just find that fascinating about them. They weren't afraid to take in all this other teaching and all this other stuff. They were confident enough in what they knew, and they were really trying to fit in. They were really trying to make the best of a bad situation. But they could do that till up to one point. And this is the point. So we go on in verse 8, and it says, Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. So he asked permission from the chief eunuch not to defile himself. God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Okay, so he went to the top. He said, hey, I'm not going to do this. And so he said, well, let's see if we can work out a compromise here. Let's see if we can maybe put this to the test. So he said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king who assigned you food and drink. What if he sees your faces looking thinner than the other men your age? You would endanger my life with the king. So he's hesitant, even though I think he really wanted to, because it says very first, God granted Daniel kindness and compassion with him. So he had favor with him. I think he really wanted to make that work, but he was fearful for himself, because what if he brings these guys in before the king? King looks them over and he's like, why'd you pick these guys? They have done poor. They're bad. And of course, we're going to see when we read the end of it that after the 3 years was up, they were the top four. Out of all the others, they were the best. So Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief eunuch had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, he said to him in verse 12, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Now, when it says the vegetables to eat and water to drink, uh, in the King James, let me see if I can find the word, pulse. It uses the word pulse. In other words, just let us just eat some grains. Let us just eat that kind of stuff. So he wanted fruit, he wanted grains, he wanted bread that was made from grains. Basically, they're not going to eat the fat or the rich meat um, that the Babylonians probably ate. And so he says, after 10 days, then examine our appearance and the appearance of your young men who are eating the king's food, and deal with your servants based on what you see. So he said, look, just 10 days. Give us 10 days. If in 10 days that we look bad, then okay, we'll go back to eating whatever the king commands. But if we don't and we look better, then let us stick to our diet. And don't be afraid to tell the king we're going to stick to our diet. Is really what he's insinuating, what he's saying there. So that's where it is. He said, man, if he comes along and you look thinner, your faces aren't as full, you're just weaklings, the king's not going to like that. And so he makes a deal with him, doesn't he? And in that, sometimes in life we have to draw a line, don't we? We have to draw a line and say, okay, I'm willing to compromise a little bit. I'm willing to learn some things from the world. I'm willing to kind of go a little ways and observe and maybe read some things that really aren't enlightening to me, but might help me understand, or be taught some things that might help me understand. But when it comes down to it, I'm going to draw a line somewhere and I'm going to say, no, this is not who my God is. It's not who I am. It's not who or what's going to honor and glorify my God. And I'm not going to do it. And so that's where he is. So we've seen in the first passage that culture sometimes expects conformity, doesn't it? Paul said in the New Testament, he said, it's okay to be in the world, but not of the world. And I think that's such a great, vast comparison or a contrast there for us to really learn from. And we learn it from these four men here, to be in the world, to take it in, to figure it out, kind of. But it doesn't mean it has to be your philosophy. It doesn't have to be your lifestyle. The New Testament talks about how, and Jesus said it probably, that the Lord of this world, he's talking about Satan, serpent, the evil one, the devil, that he is the one who controls this domain or this realm, and you don't want to be children of the evil one. You don't want to be children of the devil. So if we can observe, if we can try to fit in, if we can do whatever, but you got to draw a line somewhere. A few years ago, there was a group, and I don't know where they really started, but I knew of a group of them in St. Louis that just, they were convinced that if we're going to try to win the culture, we're going to fit in, we need to start doing drugs with these people. We need to start going to bars with these people. We need to just, try to be one of them in order to win them over. I don't agree with that 1,000%. You don't win people by showing that you're like them. You win people by showing that you're different and that God's way is a better way, that your life is blessed, that your life goes in a different direction, that you don't have to worry about certain things in your life. You don't have to be afraid. I'm just amazed at how many people in this world live afraid. And I'm not saying that things don't make me nervous or I don't, have adrenaline rushes on things. But I really try not to live in fear. I didn't get that spirit. I'm going to claim that promise. God didn't give me a spirit of fear, but a power and a love and of a sound mind. And I'm not going to live in that fear. And so I think that that's where these young men were. They weren't going to live in fear. of being in a strange place. They weren't going to just cower into everything they said, um, especially when it was something that they felt was going to be detrimental and harmful to their health. And because of God's commands about diet and things, they just believed that's what they needed to be doing. Okay, so then we get to the last section, verses 17 through 19. And out of this, we learn that the bottom line is when you are drawing the line, or when you are in culture that expects conformity, the ultimate thing is you just trust the Lord. So if you're going to develop strong convictions, that's what you have to do. So let's read these verses. Verse 17 says, God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding and every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. So what happened in the meantime? Well, you know what happened. They were victorious. They won out. From verses 13 through 17, where we didn't read. After the 10 days, man, they're if they were dogs, they'd had a really glossy coat, right? They'd really had a shiny fur, and they looked really good, and they seemed really good, and they always stood ahead or above all the others that were in this training program. And so they were victorious in that. A couple things out of that is that Daniel's commitment to his convictions was not based on the outcome. He recognized the possibility that at the end of the testing period, his plan might be rejected, even if he was better. Sometimes people won't admit it. Sometimes people look and say, yeah, well, you look better, but you're not doing that anymore. But it didn't matter whether they rejected it or not, because he knew that he should do what he believed to be right in his heart. And he did it. And that's the key, isn't it? Is follow your conviction. Know what you know is right. People don't accept it. So what? Don't let it get you down. And don't say, oh, well, maybe I should have compromised a little more. No, be true to who you are. Who's God called you to be? What has God taught you about the right way and the right things? Be true to that. So God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. He got an extra special gift out of that. He not only had great understanding in all the stuff that the Babylonians taught them, but he was kind of good with dreams and stuff. And you know where that's going. If you've read the book of Daniel, you know what's going to happen out of that. So at the end of the time that the king had said to present them, the chief eunuch presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. So you get the impression that their final exam, the king did himself. He didn't trust that to anybody else. They came in for their final exams. It was like an oral. If you've ever been in higher education, but to come in for an oral, and they, you might have a panel that goes over, but it sounds like this was probably just one-on-one. Nebuchadnezzar came in. He put him through all the tests. It was probably worse than the NFL combines for kids coming out of college and trying to get to the NFL. But he gave him something pretty rigorous to find out who was the best and who did he want to keep, who was he going to send into his court. And it says in verse 19, the king interviewed them, and among all of them, no one was found equal. No one was found equal. Did you get that? To Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they began to be the king's attendants. What a great truth out of that. And Daniel not only found favor with the people in order for them to let him do this, but now they found favor with the king, and put them in a great position for years to come. It did. So, well, anyway, just passing all that along to you and saying, God bless y'all, and have a great day. Enjoy Labor Day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.